Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Badass Podcast and Sound. Are you podcasting? If you are, good for you, but you're going to need to learn how to use at some point an equalizer. In music, an equalizer is there to help you make all of the different instruments fit together in a mix, and that means carving out specific spots where another instrument would sound better or has more prominence to make room for it. We don't need to worry about that in the podcasting world because it's just a bunch of voices. So in this case, we use an equalizer for a slightly different purpose, to make the voice sound better. And that better is really according to our aesthetic. So there are certain changes we can make with an equalizer that'll make a voice sound more present, more confident, warm, rich, or shiny, polished, trebly. So it really is up to you to learn how to use an equalizer to accentuate or de-accentuate frequencies to make it sound more the way you want it. And in that regard, it's a lot like using an equalizer on a car stereo. It's really just there to say, let's have more or less bass, more or less middle, and more or less top. We'll go a little bit further than that, but let's dig in. Here's an example of an equalizer that I like because it's graphical. So when I make a change, you can visually see where in the frequency spectrum I'm doing stuff and how much of it I'm doing. But any equalizer, no matter what the UI looks like, will have the following controls. The first one is the frequency you want to affect. Frequency is measured in hertz or cycles per second, and it's simply a number somewhere between 0 and about 20,000. In order to make a boost or a cut, you have to figure out where in the audio spectrum do you want to make it, low end, middle, or top. Next thing we have to do, after we've chosen, so let me just grab this one here, for example. This moves me up and down, and if you can just watch right here, you'll see the frequency number change. So as I scroll up, now I'm touching 717 hertz, now I'm touching 9,000 hertz. And then from there, I can boost or cut that frequency by a number of decibels. Decibels are just a measure of loudness, that's all. So here you can see the decibels right there. Goes up, I think that says about 6 right now. That says 7, 9, 10, all the way up to 18. Some don't let you go that high, but this one does. Or I can cut. That is to remove audio content at that frequency. In this case, I've removed 18 decibels at, what does that say? Something like 300 right now? Okay. Yeah. And then the final thing that you can adjust is the width of that cut or boost. So this, also known as the Q or the bandwidth control, when I turn this one left, makes the cut wider. You can see to the point there's not much audio actually left. Everything here remains untouched, but everything else in the audio spectrum has been highly affected at this point. So we may want to try swinging the control the other way. And this greatly narrows the bandwidth so that when I boost or cut, I'm not really affecting very much frequency at all. So how do you know which frequencies to adjust? Well, the first thing you want to do is learn how to use your ear, but let me give you some guidelines specific to voice. In general, in the low end, you have 0 to about 300, and that's considered the low rumble, grumble, kind of very, very low end rattle. Anything from 300 to about 1,000 will sound very chesty or very meaty. It can sound anything from warm to bordering on nasal as you get closer to 1,000 or 1 kilohertz. When you go from 1 kilohertz to 3 kilohertz, you get definitely nasal, but you also get a little bit of bite. Presence is another word that they use. And then 3 to 6K is sort of a little more of a trebly or a top end presence. That might be sometimes associated with clarity or vocal clarity. And then anything above 6 or 7 kilohertz all the way to the top of the spectrum is sheen, shine, air, or polish. But really the best way is let's listen. So I'm going to put on a recording of my voice, and we're just going to start moving the frequencies up and down. So I'll grab this guy right here, and I'll move you all the way through the frequencies using a fairly generous boost, but nothing too crazy. Watch these numbers here to see where I am in the frequency spectrum, and listen to the difference it makes on the sound. Put you out a ton of your pocket money so you can get started podcasting on the cheap and get great results. So what I'll do is just record some short audio for that purpose today. And what I'll do is state the... And there's 300. Now, is that the kind of boost you would normally make? No. Rule number one of learning equalizers is I want you to turn all the knobs all the way to the right and all the way to the left so that you can exaggerate and see what they do. So you would never boost 18 decibels at any frequency, which brings us to the next rule of equalization. It's generally better to boost and cut between 0 and 6 decibels at most, depending on the equalizer. Generally anything over 3 and you're pushing it. And you can hear that a boost of 18 sounds ridiculously unnatural. Like this just doesn't sound good.
The mission statement of my 2 podcasts. So
now, if I were to bring that boost more down to a sane, let's call it 2 or 3 decibels,
agile principles, and bring them back to their leadership game, and then bring that leadership to their teams, to their clients, to their products.
Now you can actually hear some of that boxiness creeping in, right? So anything more than, in this case, 5 decibels, it's going to start to sound unpleasant. Well, what a cut sound like? Well, let's go to the extreme. Let's take a listen.
And to the world.
The concept is that agile and great leadership go hand in hand. It sounds like someone's plugging my nose, right? So this brings us to the next rule of equalization. When you're boosting, use the Q control to boost wide. Anywhere between, like in this case, anywhere between 11 and 1 o'clock is decent. So have a look at my curve. You see, that's reasonable. That's reasonable. This is too much, and that's no good. When you're cutting, though, then you can cut a little bit narrower. So boost wide, cut narrow. So let's have a listen this time with a more sane amount of cut, like -4, and with a slightly narrower cut as well. Let's take a listen with it off.
Inherent in that also is that you need more than agile skills. You need badass skills. You need to.
So now you can hear that the equalizer is doing its work, but it's doing so gently. It's not destroying the rest of the sound. Now be careful with narrow boosts. The problem with narrow boosts is they sound ridiculously unnatural as well. So let's take a listen.
You need to become a badass person. You need to become an agile person, and then you can deliver massive value to your clients.
Hear how it sounds like you're swirling around in a bottle? Now, we talked about 0 to 300 being boomy, rumbly, and boxy. Let's listen to what 300 through 1,000 sound like. Check this out.
The Fuse Chamber podcasts exists for artists and entrepreneurs and people who in general are looking to change the world. So I want to give you, in many cases, the exact same tools and techniques, but the skills that you need as an artist or entrepreneur to build the life that you really want, so you can do the thing that you love most in this world, you can make your impact, you can find success, and you can have the life that you really want.
Now you hear it's like a bit of a hot mess in there. There's a lot of nasal and a lot of boxiness, and it generally doesn't sound all that great. But as we get closer to 1,000, you start to hear a nice edge or presence. Let's tune it down a little bit and bring the boost down to a more sane level, and let's check out what those same frequencies would sound like with a more reasonable amount of boost.
And with that, we'll use this audio then to test out different kinds of plugins, from compression to equalizers to saturation to gates, noise reducers, and I'll use this audio sample to show you how starting with nothing more than $200 worth of recording equipment plus a decent.
Yeah, as we get up the range there, it sounds a little bit more natural and adds a bit of detail to the voice. So let's check it out without anything and then with
a decent microphone. You can make an amazing broadcast quality podcast, audiobook, voiceover, whatever.
A touch nasal, but it's also, like, it adds a little bit of punch to the voice. Let's check out 1 through 3,000.
Hello, everybody. Chris Williams here. I am recording a podcast today using no expensive tools, no universal audio interfaces, nothing but a nice microphone. And
now in the low 1,000, it's nasal. As you get close to 3,000, it starts to hurt your ears. It's way too bitey. But I actually like something that's going on there around 1.5. I thought it sounded good. So let's go back to around 1.5 or 1,500, and let's bring it down to a more sane amount of boost. And let's make that slope even a little more gentle. Let's have a listen without.
And a Tascam DR40 portable field recorder. This thing's loaded up with 3 AA batteries, and that's it. And I have my condenser microphone plugged straight into the device. No.
Do you notice how that adds some nice presence and a little solidity to the sound without making anything brittle or anything that hurts your ears? Let's check out what's going on from 3,000 to about 6,000. Check this out. You're going to hear a lot of shine, and then at the top of the range, you're going to notice that the S's really start to sound hissy.
No processing, no nothing. So the purpose of this recording is to show you what it can sound like without using any.
Did you hear that? Anything above 7,000 is what we call air. And let's boost that, and let's have a listen to what it does to the sound.
Expensive tools, just really easily available stuff that doesn't put you out a ton of your pocket money, so you can get started podcasting on the cheap and get great results. So
now you may have noticed that around 10,000, 11,000, the S's stop hurting, and it just adds this really nice, very high-end kind of air to it. It's still a bit too much, but let's take a listen without and then with at a more reasonable amount of boost. This is around, let's put it around 11,000. Have a listen. Without.
So what I'll do is just record some short audio for that purpose today. And what I'll do is state the mission statement of my 2 podcasts. So the Badass Agile podcast exists to create an elite.
And you notice how it just adds a little bit of treble in the top end. Now, this kind of curve is not necessarily the best idea, and it's not necessarily all that efficient or wise for a top end boost. And likewise, if we were going to boost way down in the bottom, you don't have to just boost that frequency. Another way of boosting and cutting is to use something called a shelving equalizer. So here a shelf will basically take everything above the frequency you select, in this case around 10,000, and it will just boost everything. And you see how it's not just making a bell shape, right? It's boosting everything. So that's a choice you may want to experiment as well, rather than using a bell, which looks like this. There's one on the low as well. There's something called a shelf down here. And you can see it does the same thing as opposed to a peak, which looks more like a mountain. And then if you wanted to cut everything, like right down to 0, for example, a lot of times when you're recording with a sensitive microphone, things like people walking on the floor, air conditioner noise, mechanical noise, there's frequencies that don't add anything interesting to the voice and actually make rumble and things distracting and clutter up your audio. So we can actually use something called a high pass filter to remove anything below a certain frequency. And if there's too much error top end, you can use a high pass filter to remove anything above a certain frequency. All right, so now how do you know which ones you should select for your voice and how much to add or cut? Well, this again is experimentation. Now that you know that low end is thump and rumble, and then 300 to 1000 is chest and warmth, and then 1 to 3 is presence and bite. 3 to 6 is that mid-range sizzle and detail. And then 7 and above, or 6, 7 and above, is high-end polish and sizzle and air. You can start experimenting with those ranges to see what sounds good. Well, so what sounds good based on what? What I like to do is take a voice that I like. So here's an example of a dude who is doing some voiceovers on the internet, and just check out the sound of his voice and compare it to mine.
In tropical Pacific, the sharkmen work into the night to unlock the mysteries of a secret world.
Nice and bassy, but still really good detail. Let's compare it to my voice.
Elite tribe of leaders can take agile principles and bring them back to their leadership game.
With high hopes of adding to their tiger shark tally.
Well, he's using probably a $5,000 or $10,000 microphone, but the point is, I can definitely add some bass and some top end to mine to get something more like his voice. So as it turns out, after playing with it a bit, I might want to use, I have a preset just to make this faster, that adds a little bit of action around just below 100K. It removes some warmth and woolliness around 200K, and it adds a nice peak around that 1.5K that I was saying before I like for my voice. Now listen to the difference that it makes. Let's listen without and then with.
Game, and then bring that leadership to their teams, to their clients, to their products, and to the world.
You hear that bottom end just parachute in there? Let's have a listen again without.
The concept is that agile and great leadership go hand in hand, and that the principles that we learn in agile are useful beyond the software delivery community.
Now it's added a little too much nose to it, so I may want to dial back on that 1.5K and maybe just ease up on how much 200 I take out, because it's starting to sound a bit unnatural. Remember, too much boost is no good. So those are the rules. We've learned the controls you have to use: frequency, cut, boost, and Q. And we have learned about the different frequency bands and what kind of action or sound we can get in the various ranges. We've learned that we should always, when learning an equalizer, start by swinging the knobs all the way to the left and right to see what they do, and then trust your ears, compare it to sounds that you like, and then play with the equalizer until you find a way to make it sound more like what you like and less like what you don't. And that's it. Next time I'll be showing you how to use different kinds of equalizers and checking out the ones that I think sound particularly good. So thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you next time.